In warfare, there are moments of quiet calculation and there are moments of decisive action. For over a decade, the financial war between the United States and China has been one of quiet calculation. A slow, methodical chess game played out in currency markets and trade balances. China bought our debt, we bought their goods. It was a fragile, toxic, but stable relationship. That stability is now over. What we have just witnessed is not a calculation, it is a declaration. The latest data from the US Treasury is not just a statistic, it is a weapon being fired. China has just unloaded over $700 billion in US debt. This isn't a gradual reduction. This isn't a minor portfolio adjustment. This is the single largest dump of US Treasuries by a foreign nation in history. This is not a warning shot to the bow. This is a warning shot through the bow. It is a direct, unmistakable message to Washington. The financial hostage situation is over. China is no longer willing to fund America's deficits, and they are daring the Federal Reserve to do something about it. This is the final warning. The dollar's status as the world's reserve currency is no longer a given. It is now under direct assault. For decades, America's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness, its debt. The US government has been able to spend trillions more than it takes in for one simple reason. Foreign countries, led by China and Japan, were willing to lend us the money by buying our Treasury bonds. It was a form of financial blackmail. We get to run massive deficits and they get access to the US market. China became our largest foreign creditor, holding over $3 trillion in US debt at its peak. This arrangement gave them immense leverage. If they ever decided to stop buying or worse, start selling, it could trigger a catastrophic collapse in the US bond market, sending interest rates soaring and crashing the American economy. It was the financial equivalent of mutually assured destruction. They wouldn't do it, the expert said, because it would hurt them as much as it would hurt us. The value of their own holdings would plummet. The experts were wrong. They failed to understand the Chinese mindset. They play the long game. They are willing to take a short-term loss for a long-term strategic victory. And that victory is the dethroning of the US dollar. The data is undeniable. According to the Treasury International Capital, or TIC, reporting system, China's official holdings of US debt have been steadily declining for years. But the recent numbers show a shocking acceleration. They haven't just stopped buying. They are actively, aggressively selling, but they are not doing it in the open. That would be too obvious. They are using a sophisticated network of offshore accounts and proxies to mask their sales. They sell their treasuries to Belgium, or to the Cayman Islands, or to Switzerland. These smaller countries then show a massive, unexplainable surge in their holdings of US debt. It's a shell game, a financial sleight of hand designed to give them plausible deniability. But the numbers don't lie. When you trace the flows, the conclusion is inescapable. China is liquidating its position, and the $700 billion figure is a conservative estimate of the total sales over the past 18 months. Why now? 3 reasons. First, the weaponization of the dollar. When the US seized Russia's foreign currency reserves after the invasion of Ukraine, it sent a shockwave through the international community. It proved that US dollars held in reserve were not safe. They were a political tool that could be confiscated at will. For China, a nation with its own geopolitical ambitions, particularly regarding Taiwan, this was an unacceptable risk. They realized their trillion-dollar holdings were not an asset. They were a liability, a hostage. Second, the BRICS alternative. As we've discussed, China is the driving force behind a new financial architecture, independent of the dollar. They are building a world where they don't need US treasuries. They are building a system backed by gold, oil, and other real commodities. To make that system work, they need to convert their paper dollar assets into real physical assets. They are selling US debt and using the proceeds to buy gold mines in Africa, oil fields in the Middle East, and ports in South America. They are trading paper promises for hard assets. Third, and most critically, they believe the US is in a terminal debt spiral. They see the $34 trillion in debt. They see the trillion-dollar annual deficits with no end in sight. They see the Federal Reserve trapped between fighting inflation and bankrupting the government. They have made a cold, hard calculation. The The US dollar is going to collapse under the weight of its own debt, and they have decided to get out before the building comes down. They are not just a passenger on the Titanic anymore. They are lowering their own lifeboat and rowing away as fast as they can. This is the final warning shot because it proves the old logic is dead. China is no longer afraid of a US bond market collapse. In fact, they may be actively trying to trigger one. They are calling the Federal Reserve's bluff. What can the Fed do? If they let interest rates rise to attract new buyers for the debt, it will crush the US economy and make the government's interest payments explode. If they step in and print money to buy the debt themselves, a process called quantitative easing, they will unleash a tidal wave of inflation that will devalue the dollar into oblivion. There are no good options left. This is checkmate. The consequences for the average American will be devastating. As China and other nations dump the dollar, its value will fall. The cost of all imported goods will surge. Inflation will come roaring back, but this time, the Fed will be powerless to stop it. The stock market will crash. Retirement accounts will be wiped out. The era of America's exorbitant privilege will come to a violent end. This isn't a prediction. It's an observation. The data is public. The trend is clear. The largest creditor to the United States is running for the exit. They have fired their warning shot. The next shot will be aimed at the heart of the American economy. And it is not a matter of if, but when. Third, and most importantly, they see the writing on the wall. They see the $34 trillion in U.S. national debt, a number that is now larger than the entire U.S. economy. They see the political paralysis in Washington, where the only agreement is to spend more money. They see the Federal Reserve, trapped between fighting inflation and propping up a fragile banking system. They know that the only way out for the United States is to devalue its currency, to pay back its mountain of debt with worthless inflated dollars. China is simply getting out before the final act of this tragedy begins. They are refusing to be the victim of America's inflationary default. This is not just a financial transaction, it is a strategic decoupling, a declaration of independence from the dollar system. It is the financial equivalent of building a rival military alliance, and it has terrifying implications for every single American. The US bond market is the foundation of the entire global financial system. The interest rate on the 10-year Treasury bond is the benchmark off which all other interest rates are set. Your mortgage, your car loan, your credit card debt, it's all tied to this number. When China, the largest foreign player, becomes a massive seller instead of a buyer, it puts immense upward pressure on these interest rates. To keep the market from collapsing, the Federal Reserve will be forced to step in and buy the bonds that China is selling. This process is called monetizing the debt. It is a fancy term for printing money. This is the debt spiral. China sells bonds. Interest rates rise. The Fed is forced to print money to buy those bonds, which increases the money supply. This new money chases the same amount of goods, causing inflation. This inflation makes the bonds even less attractive to foreign buyers, so they sell more, which forces the Fed to print even more money. It is a vicious, self-reinforcing cycle, a feedback loop from hell, and China has just deliberately triggered it. This is the final warning shot. For years we have been warned about our reliance on foreign creditors. We were told that our national debt was a threat to our national security. Those warnings were ignored. We have become addicted to cheap money and massive deficits. And now our largest creditor is calling in the debt. They are telling us that the party is over. The bill is due. The consequences will not be immediate, but they will be inevitable. A steady rise in interest rates, a steady decline in the value of the dollar, and a steady, grinding increase in the cost of living. Your savings will be eroded by inflation. Your retirement will be devalued. The American dream, built on the foundation of a stable currency, will become a nightmare. This is the price of empire. This is the cost of losing a financial war, and China has just fired the first and perhaps final shot.